Perfect, thank you. So yes, as Mike said, I'm giving the update about the IDEA working group, which is the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity and Accessibility working group that is kind of made up of members from all of the different AGs and also additional members as well. So this is basically a DEIA group, but using a kind of funner acronym for that, which actually makes up a word. So it's just diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, as you are used to, arranged differently. So myself and Jessie are the committee members from SBAG, and then Moses and Christina are the working group co-chairs. So thank you to the two of them for a lot of these slides, and also to Jessie for contributing to making these slides as well. So this IDEA working group was formed pretty recently in August of 2019 and had the first meeting in October of 2019, so it hasn't been around for too long. Since we have existed, mostly what we have been working on is the development of white papers for the decadal survey, which had a total of 242 co-authors, which is great. So thank you to everybody that worked on these white papers and contributed to them. We've presented to AGs like today, to conferences, meetings, etc. And as I mentioned, we have 2 representatives from each of the assessment groups, etc. A special representative with a sociology background, and many additional members as well. There are about more than 50 members in this working group, which is a great font of knowledge for us to all draw from. So here are the steering committee members. As I mentioned, we have members from each of the different AGs and associated groups, like you can see here. And our special member is Jennifer Tessie from Princeton, who is an expert in sociology and studying planetary scientists. So she brings a lot of great insights as well. Our main task, as I mentioned, has been working on these white papers for the decadal survey. So we led the discussion of and coordinated the submission of these white papers on a variety of topics. And there's this little link down here, which brings you to a spreadsheet of all of the white papers. Hopefully I'll put it in the chat before I had issues sharing my screen. And you can click on it there. And I also included screenshots of the titles and the corresponding authors for each of these white papers. And then there are links to the BAS versions of those white papers in this spreadsheet if you go there. So you can see they cover a wide range of topics. The demographic study that you just heard about from Ed, strategic recommendations to improve diversity in the field, enabling the workforce to do the best science by funding work that is a service to the profession, by codes of conduct, accessibility in planetary science, ensuring inclusivity in the decadal survey, lessons learned from the astro-decadal survey, solutions for a more diverse and inclusive decade of planetary science, LGBTQ+ in planetary science, recommendations from the CSWA survey, extended missions, blank papers, professional development in the next decade, preventing harassment workshop, and exerting EDI influence at the institutional level. And then this goes on to a second page showing you the wide range of topics that we covered. So a guide to collaborations with Indigenous communities, military work, building safer, more inclusive field experiences, the value of dual anonymous peer review, addressing mental health, planetary nomenclature and Indigenous communities, the growing digital divide, disrupting colonial practices, results of the 2020 workforce survey, a call to the decadal panels to implement actionable recommendations, non-binary systems, the arts, and also finally one that I led about foreign nationals employed in studying in planetary research in the United States. This wasn't actually a white paper submitted to the decadal survey, because at the time the white papers were solicited with the presidential administration, we didn't feel comfortable submitting a white paper on foreign nationals, but we later did an LPSC abstract about it, and as far as I'm aware, it's made its way to the decadal panel. So if you haven't seen that, please let me know and I can pass it on to you. What kind of new work are we doing? So we're working on creating standard procedures, best practices, and checks and balances on hiring and selections with an eye toward improvements in IDEA and representation. So this is something that we're focusing on at the moment. In fact, the SBAG committee recently, when we selected new members, kind of tried out some of these ideas. So we had a rubric that was of the kind of the criteria that we were looking for new committee members based on the advertisement and on the website. So that rubric allowed us to kind of focus our discussion and make sure we were kind of treating all the applicants equally. And then we also tried some kind of quantitative assessment of the applicants. And then once we had done all that, looking at those criteria that we were looking for, we then kind of cross-checked with respect to diversity in all sorts of different dimensions. The IDEA working group is also advocating for standardized accessibility improvements, such as captions and American Sign Language interpreters, improving the community's pandemic response, and seeing if there's anything we can do to help about virtual meeting and conference fatigue. It's ironic that I'm telling you that at a virtual conference. So we are continuing all that work for 2021. Feel free to get in touch with anybody if you have thoughts and questions. And we also have time for questions and discussion. And I'll leave you with this word cloud of all the main words that came up during the in those white papers that we all submitted to the decadal survey. So that is all that I've got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Let's see. Yeah, thank you for the URL also. See, it's there. Are there questions? Let's see, I'm not sure if that's. Not seeing a question in the chat.
I have a question and somehow I can't raise my hand anymore. May I go ahead?
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
No.
It's complicated anyways. So Jennifer, kind of back to what Fran was talking about, that teams start to form early, and by the time you get to proposals being ready to submit, the cake is already baked. And there are several places, several spots along the way where introspection could be applied to whether teams are really representative and are achieving the goals of IDEA. So these recommendations, are kind of through the ag system and to the decadal, but I think one step has to be to educate the institutions that are supporting these teams to produce these proposals, to build that into the process. So do you have or have you thought through how to reach out to those people as customers of your recommendations? And so particularly what kind of metrics you might offer them as guidelines?
Yes, that's definitely the kind of thing that we are working on at the moment, trying to think out for guidelines and things like that. I think we've discussed how it's helpful that there was language put into, I think it was the Discovery, or was it the New Frontiers AO from NASA?
Both.
Yeah, talking about how they want to see diverse teams and things like that. So that's very helpful because it's showing that this is something that NASA, who you're proposing to, wants. So that's great. And yeah, we're definitely working on it at the moment. We are kind of starting with trying to get more diverse teams on the AGS because that's something that we're all directly involved in. So maybe seeing what works with this, such as like the rubric and trying to make it more qualitative and things like that. Of course, proposal teams, it's going to be a little bit different. I know one good thing that I heard at the PI Launchpad, they had a panel of PIs, and I can't actually think that what they had done was when they were putting together their team, that they had obviously contacted people that they know and things like that, but that has the shortcomings that we've already heard about today. But they also did a literature search to see who was kind of publishing on that topic, and then invited some people from the literature search to join the team, which was excellent. So maybe there are things like that that we could recommend and think through, and the community could try out as well.
That sounds good.
There's a question from Stephanie Milam, and I think it's follow up on something Ed had suggested or recommended. would this group be willing to establish a survey for all ags to put forward on climate and demographics?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I can definitely take that to the IDEA working group and see what they think. I know there's also some work to try and maybe expand those like inspires questions and things like that. So maybe we could collaborate on that. But definitely, I think it's been shown today and in previous presentations and before today as well, how important it is to know what the percentages are, what the kind of demographics are in the field. And that's going to be a really important resource. So we can definitely go off and discuss that and get back to you.
I have a question too, and I raised my hand, but.
Sure.
Okay, because I'm not on a NASA computer. That's what everything seems easier. Oh, Paul has a hand up and he's on a NASA computer. Wow, good job, Paul. Anyway, sorry. I'm really happy to see the evolution of the AGs with how they're selecting members, right? And I think that everything you described there, you know, it sounds really great, right? You know, to try to do this. Are you getting diverse enough applicants to start with, or by the time you're already getting the applicants, do you feel like that, that, you know, for whatever reason, it's, you know, I mean, is there more outreach that has to be done before just putting an ad out, or is that working okay?
Yeah, so we had a discussion about this in the steering committee while we were looking at the applications from this time, and we really could do better with getting a more diverse pool of applicants to begin with. So that is definitely a problem, and it's going back to like the earlier presentations that we had. The pipeline of people just like isn't really there. So definitely we need to think more of a community about how we can encourage people to stay in the community in the first place, so that then they can apply to serve on steering committees and things like this. And that was definitely something we noted while we were going through the applications. Obviously, we got a bunch of great applicants, but we would love to get even more, and from different backgrounds and things like that. So yeah, we definitely noted that.
Paul, did you have something you wanted to add or ask?
Yeah, so question for Jennifer. Really interested in the foreign national aspect. Can you go into that a little bit more? And were you looking at, you know, what visa status or green card, or could you go into that a little bit more and what you found?
Yeah, so in the abstract, we were mostly saying, hey, there are foreign nationals in planetary science. We should be more aware of them. These are some of the kind of issues that they face. And then between the abstract stage and the LPSC stage, those of us that wrote the abstract and were co-authors on it basically tried to find any data that we could about the community. And so we all went to kind of institutions that we were familiar with to try and find some data. Some institutions had tons of data on their website. So in particular, like UCLA was excellent. I had to drill down in like all different kinds of categories. Other institutions were happy to provide it on request. Other institutions didn't want to provide it. So there was a big, broad range of what we could find. And so we found some general trends. Generally, there weren't that many foreign nationals as undergraduates, so perhaps like 10-ish% or something like that. I'm just giving like orders of magnitude. Then it goes up to more like the few tens of percent for graduate school. Then it peaked around postdoc, where foreign nationals could be like 50 or 60% of the postdoc community in different institutions. And then it went down again when you got to like faculty and research kind of positions. We postulated that it went down again then, because at that point a lot of people would have got green cards or things, or citizenship or things like that, so wouldn't be reporting as foreign nationals again. But definitely a community-wide demographics would be incredibly helpful for this, because we got just random numbers that we were able to source. And so if this could be included in some of these community-wide surveys, that would be amazing. Because first you need to know who you're actually trying to help before you can even get to helping them. So that would definitely be something that we're advocating for with respect to the foreign national thing.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting just to see how many of the foreign nationals did manage to convert or wanted to convert to a green card or US citizenship. I think that'd be interesting to follow, especially for the demographics as well. That would help.
And like it makes a massive difference once foreign nationals manage to get green cards, with the amount of involvement that you can have, especially if you're like at a NASA center and wanting to be involved in the nitty-gritty of missions and things like that. And for everybody in the community, just because you get stability, you're able to stay somewhere and live somewhere and know that you can be there for the long term. So.
I guess following up on Stephanie's question, and maybe this is for Ed too. I mean, there's like right ways to do surveys and wrong ways to do surveys, right? And I think like setting up the survey, and I don't know, do you need to have like professional people in order to get something? Or sometimes if you set it up wrong from the start, it just is kind of like has limited usefulness. I don't know, maybe you know about that, or maybe Ed can chime in too.
Yeah, I'll let Ed go first on that one because I don't have any specific insights other than to say I agree, and it's definitely something we need to be smart about.
Yeah, so you can ask your working group to do a certain amount of things, right? But at the same time, we can't really ask you to like fill in for a professional survey company, right? I mean, or group or people who do these for real, you know, when it's a bunch of volunteers and who have good intentions. But Ed, maybe your thoughts.
Yeah, when it comes to climate surveys, there are definitely best practices to ensure that the questions get you not the answers you're looking for, but get you the right answers, right? Because you can write questions in a leading way that then already biases your survey. So for climate surveys, 100%, I think whenever we do that, a social scientist should be somewhere talking with you or leading that survey. And in fact, the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center did a climate survey recently, and they had an outside expert come in and do it. The social scientist came in and did it. For demographic surveys, I think we have a lot of experience in our field to lean in on from like the DPS and others, where we could take those examples and apply to the ags. There again are still things that one needs to consider for that. From a diversity perspective, making sure one is asking questions that are actually representative of the identities in the field and doesn't exclude certain people. So for that, I think the inter-ag EDI working group would be good to pass those surveys through, because we can pull in the collective experience from us and make sure that those type of demographic surveys are representative of who we are. But for climate surveys, 100% social scientists should be in there.
And just follow up, I thought my thoughts were with that, Nancy, that group could help get things started and initiated so that there is a consistency and we make sure we're doing the right kind of survey, that we get the pertinent information that's necessary for the next decadal, as well as our own metrics that we can follow up with each ag independently, just in case we want to know what the small body statistics are of, you know, minorities or Native Americans, for example. So, but that was my thought exactly, Ed, is that it probably should be handled by an outside company or professional group that can help us do this. Because there's also, you know, personal information and things like that that might be included that we don't want to put on any of our computers.
Jennifer, I'm curious and I had to step away, so I missed part of your presentation. If this was discussed, I apologize. But has there been discussion about how to make like open mic sessions more inclusive? You know, here it's wonderful to get a dozen or so people talking who share, but there's way more than a dozen people here that might have opinions. And so has there been discussion around how to better facilitate input during ag meetings themselves?
So that's a really great question, especially as we transition back to kind of a more like hybrid in-person / virtual kind of format maybe for some of these ag meetings. So I haven't been at all of the IDEA working group meetings, but it's not springing to mind that we have talked about that specifically. They may have, but maybe it's in our upcoming kind of, it's like definitely on our upcoming things to do, because we were so taken up with all the decadal survey papers for a long time. I'm on a organizing committee for an upcoming one of the Brines conferences. So we were kind of thinking about how to do this specifically in an in-person format. because you want to make sure that everybody can talk if they want to and encourage people to talk, and also make sure that everybody can hear if people are talking. So you want to provide microphones and things. So generally what's done is there's like a microphone in the middle of the room or something in the walking kind of space. But then that means the people next to it tend to go up, because if you're a little hesitant to ask a question, you're probably not going to go up and stand in front of everybody and stand in a microphone. So we were talking about the way some teams do it. In particular, I've noticed at the Clipper team meetings, they have this like squidgy ball mic thing, and they throw it around to people, and then people can ask questions using that. So that makes it maybe a little bit more easy for people to talk. Also, if people have mobility issues, it means they don't have to get up and down to use the mic and things like that. So that could be helpful maybe for in-person. For remote meetings, it's definitely, it's a tricky thing, and especially when we go back to the hybrid of in-person and remote, the remote people tend to get forgotten about a little bit. So I think in the community, we're gonna have to get creative about ways to include remote participants a little bit more when there's people in the room. I know at some meetings we've had like a Slack channel and things to go along with the virtual meetings, and that's been kind of good because people can chat in that a bit more freeform than the chat that's available in like WebEx or Ring Central or whatever. But then that can have issues as well, because you're trying to pay attention to a lot going on at the same time. So we don't have any answers for you yet, but this is definitely one of the priority things that we'll be doing this year, and we'll report back.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as well in a similar way that there's been a lot of the work you all have been doing has demonstrated that engaging social science experts has been really helpful for advancing the conversation, right? You know, I'm not an expert, but it seems as though someone probably somewhere is about how to, you know, foster better collaborative meetings. I wonder if there's literature or things like that that could be accessed to find best practices that might help these sorts of meetings be more inclusive. Yeah, definitely. And I think the Young Scientist group on Facebook, some people were posting literature like that recently. I'll see if I can find the links and put them in the chat before we're done today.
I'll just say thank you again for everything that your group has been doing in this Cross-AG effort, and for all of the white papers. I know it was a big push for the decadal survey to get them, but they have been a real resource, and it's really appreciated. And thank you for following up with the LPSC. We can take inputs from people still. So, you know, really, if there is anything coming from your group, please do reach out. Yeah, and I agree with Jesse. This is a great discussion, and Tarek's point is really important too. You know, how do we hear from everybody?
Definitely. Yeah, and thank you to you and everybody for being so engaged on the topic. It's a great conversation. So.
Well, this has been a really interesting session, for sure. I guess we can, it's almost time for a lunch or afternoon break, depending where you are, I guess. But I guess I follow up on something that Paul was saying about foreign nationals, and just wondering, could it be broken down in terms of these designated countries, people from designated countries? Because, you know, and I don't know if anything's been done there or what that would tell us. I mean,
yeah, definitely we couldn't find anything that specific, at least across multiple institutions and things like that. But certainly it would be worth considering putting in a question like that. You want to be aware of like privacy issues and things like that, so you probably don't want to ask people specific citizenships, but
yeah, it's a little
people from
sensitive.
designated countries do have a specific set of like issues and things that they face that are kind of an enhancement of the issues faced by the foreign national community in general. So it could be worthwhile definitely to think about something like that.